Have you ever wondered why some women haunt a man's soul, even after he's moved on, even when he's smiling in photos with someone new? It's not about how she looked, it's not even about what she gave, it's what she reflected, the parts of him he could not unsee once she left. You see, there are women who pass through a man's life like a breeze, and then there are women who enter like a mirror, one he didn't know he needed until it cracked him open. Carl Jung understood this better than most. He knew the unconscious remembers what the ego tries to bury. And the woman who reaches a man's unconscious, who touches the unhealed child, the aching masculine, the forgotten inner seeker, she doesn't just leave memories. She leaves fingerprints on his psyche. She becomes the echo he hears in his silences, even when he pretends he's moved on, even when he's wrapped around someone else's attention, even when he performs happiness like a well-rehearsed role. A part of him, the part he can't name, still drifts back to the woman who saw through him. The woman who didn't just love his curated self, but stood calmly in front of his shadows and didn't flinch. That's not something the ego forgets. Because while the ego may chase novelty, the soul longs for recognition. And if you were the woman who saw his truth before he could admit it to himself, you're not just unforgettable, you're archetypal. You've become a symbol his unconscious won't let go of, not because of what you did, but because of who you were in his inner mythology. This is what most women never realize. It's not the grand gestures, it's not the texts, the trips, the titles. It's the energetic imprint. The way you looked at him when he was silent, the way you held space when he was distant, the way your presence pulled his truth to the surface like a tide he couldn't resist. You weren't performing for love. You were love, undefended, whole, sovereign. And to a man still chained to his ego, that was terrifying, not because it was wrong, but because it was too right. So now he's elsewhere, with someone new, someone safer, perhaps, someone who doesn't challenge the mask, someone who doesn't ask, but who are you, really? And he thinks he's moved on, he thinks he's free. But late at night, when the distractions fade and the performance quiets, he remembers, not your body, not your voice, your mirror. He remembers what it felt like to be seen, not liked, not desired, seen. And that is the kind of memory that haunts a man's soul long after the photos fade. It isn't nostalgia, it's psychological tension. The tension between who he became with you and who he still refuses to become without you. This is the hidden grief of the masculine, not the loss of love, but the loss of meaning that love brought. Some men replace you, but they cannot erase you. And if you've ever doubted your impact because he moved on, hear this. A man may outgrow the relationship. He may reject the truth you brought. He may even try to replace the depth you offered with surface distractions. But if you touched his shadow, if you danced with the part of him he hides from others, then part of him still sits beside you, even in the arms of another. Because you weren't a chapter, you were the turning point. And some men read that chapter over and over, even when they pretend they've closed the book. It's easy to believe that being unforgettable means being constantly contacted, chased, or praised. But in the language of the unconscious, presence has nothing to do with proximity. In the architecture of a man's inner world, you may still live in the room he locks when company comes over, not because he's indifferent, but because he remembers you too vividly. There are 3 psychic imprints that linger in a man's heart long after physical separation. You don't see them, you feel them. And even if he never speaks your name again, they manifest as shifts in how he shows up in every connection that follows. Because when a man encounters a woman who vibrates at the frequency of truth, of feminine self-possession, of inner stillness, he cannot unsee what she reveals. First, she disrupts his illusions, not with anger, not with demands, but with clarity. She doesn't try to fix him. She doesn't plead. She simply reflects. And that reflection becomes unbearable for the ego, but unforgettable for the soul. Jung called this the confrontation with the shadow, that rejected part of the self that holds the pain, the fear, the primal need for validation. The woman who mirrors this shadow doesn't accuse, she simply exists in a way that forces awareness. And when she walks away, he realizes too late that he had been hiding from himself the entire time. Second, she awakens his longing, not the surface-level desire that fades in convenience, but the deep ache to be witnessed, to be chosen not for performance, but for presence. This kind of woman doesn't flatter his strengths. She sees his wounds. She doesn't fear his silence. She understands the rage buried beneath it. And when a woman understands a man beyond what he can articulate, she becomes an experience, not a memory. That experience becomes the standard he searches for in others, but never quite finds again. Because now everyone else feels like a distraction, pretty, perhaps, pleasing, but not piercing. And once a man has tasted the piercing gaze of a conscious woman, the kind who sees both his power and his pain without flinching, he cannot return to small talk and surface love without something inside him recoiling. Finally, she leaves gracefully. No drama, no spectacle, just silence that burns more than words ever could. Because that silence isn't cold, it's sovereign. It says, I saw you, I felt you, I loved you, but I will not betray myself for you. And in that moment, something inside him fractures, not because she withdrew love, but because she refused to collapse. This is what makes her unforgettable. Not her beauty, not her body, her boundaries. In a world where women are taught to prove, to please, to explain, the woman who simply walks away in dignity becomes mythic in his mind. She is no longer just a woman. She is the symbol of everything his soul craves, but his ego resists. Truth, vulnerability, surrender. And the cruel paradox is that the more he tries to forget her, the more she embeds herself in the archetypes that shape his emotional world. She becomes the muse he doesn't speak of, the ghost in his new relationship, the reason he hesitates when another woman asks him to open up, because he remembers what it felt like to be seen without armor, and how terrifying, how liberating, how unforgettable that truly was. So if you've ever felt like you were just a phase, a moment, a name that's no longer spoken, know this: when you moved on, you didn't disappear. You implanted. You became the ache he doesn't understand, the silence he can't explain, the reason he lies awake wondering why no one else feels like you. Because some women touch a man's life, but some touch his unconscious. He might scroll past your photos without liking. He might walk past you on the street without pausing. He might post smiling pictures with someone new and craft a story where you never existed. But behind all that performance is a man haunted, not by your presence, but by your absence. You see, the feminine wound is taught to obsess over being remembered by action, but the masculine wound is marked by what he cannot face. And what he cannot face, he stores, deep, in the caverns of his unconscious. And Carl Jung would tell you, what we repress, we become ruled by. So he may call her everything he ever wanted, but notice how quickly he grows restless. Watch the way his attention frays, how his emotional availability flickers. It's not because she's not enough. It's because you already showed him what enough really feels like. And anything less now tastes like ash in his mouth. The woman he can't forget is not always the loudest in his story. Often, she's the quiet hum beneath every song that makes him ache. She's the reason he stares at the ceiling a little too long after a joke falls flat. She's the moment of pause between messages to his current partner, when his soul whispers, "This is fine, but it's not real." When a woman touches a man's shadow desire, she becomes an activation point. Shadow desire is not lust, it's not fantasy, it's not even romance. It's the yearning to merge with what has been denied. For most men, that denied part is the feminine essence within them, the vulnerable self, the intuitive self, the part that wants to be held, not just admired. And when he meets a woman who embodies both strength and softness, when she shows him that a woman can walk beside him without shrinking, his internal compass rewrites itself. He may not understand it, he may run from it, but he will never forget it. Because the world teaches men to dominate, to conquer, to protect, but very few were taught how to receive. And when a woman gives her truth without bitterness, gives her presence without need, and gives her love without control, she becomes unreachable once she's gone. Not because he can't find her, but because he can't recreate what only she was willing to give. This is why some men spiral after losing a conscious woman. Not because she broke them, but because she awakened a part of them they had buried beneath performance, pride, and distraction. She became a mirror, and mirrors are terrifying when you've spent a lifetime avoiding your own eyes. And for many men, the realization doesn't come while she's still around. It arrives in the quiet, in the pause between partners, in the moment when nothing external is filling the void. That's when her memory returns, not as a highlight reel, but as a lesson, a haunting, a whisper. This is what truth feels like. She's unforgettable because she never begged to be remembered. She's unforgettable because she let herself be real, even when it cost her the man. That kind of woman doesn't chase. That kind of woman doesn't cling. That kind of woman knows, deep in her bones, that the ones who are truly meant for her cannot forget her, not because of what she did, but because of who she was in their presence. So if you've been doubting your impact, if you've been questioning whether he ever truly saw you, the answer is yes. He saw you. He sees you still, but from a distance now, too far to reach and too late to reclaim. And yet, there's a secret he'll never tell you, a confession buried so deep beneath pride and performance that even he may not fully realize it. It's this: you were the moment he almost became a different man. Not because you changed him, no, but because for the first time he wanted to evolve. Not for approval, not for status, but because your presence stirred the dormant king within his chaos. You mirrored his potential, not just his patterns, and that is terrifying. You didn't just ignite his desire, you challenged his direction. And herein lies the paradox of unforgettable women. They do not offer safety in the traditional sense. They offer awakening. And awakening always costs comfort. When a man encounters this kind of woman, he stands at the threshold of a different self. He is invited, silently, unconsciously, into the initiatory fire, the fire of reflection, the fire of his shadow. Most turn away, not because she failed him, but because the part of him that met her wasn't ready to meet himself. Carl Jung said, Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. And so he walks away. He rationalizes, he replaces, he distracts, and yet he carries her. Not in his phone, not in his bed, but in the ache that lingers after every interaction that lacks depth. Because once a man has tasted the sacred, he can't go back to the surface without knowing he's starving. She becomes the what if he doesn't dare say aloud, the late-night memory he calls coincidence, the quiet breath he exhales when someone asks about the one that got away. What he doesn't know is that the woman he remembers has already risen. She no longer waits for closure. She no longer edits herself for male comfort. She no longer carries the emotional labor of explaining why she was never too much, only too honest. She became her own mirror. She faced her own shadow. She learned that being unforgettable is not a performance, it is a consequence of radical self-possession. And you are not unforgettable because of how you made him feel. You are unforgettable because of how you made him see himself, his emptiness, his longing, his false power. You did not just awaken his attraction, you awakened his absence. And now, even if he's with someone else, even if he posts the smiles, speaks the lines, plays the part, you remain, not as competition, not as regret, but as a threshold. He may love again, he may even marry, but there will be a room inside him where your voice echoes, not with words, but with truth. You were the mirror he looked into once and blinked. The truth is, unforgettable women don't try to be unforgettable. They simply refuse to abandon themselves in a world that profits from their self-betrayal. They love with depth. They speak with clarity. They leave when they are no longer met. So let him forget your name if he must. Let him pretend he never felt the fire. Let him rewrite history if that soothes his shame. Because deep down, he knows he'll never meet you again in another woman. He'll meet your absence, and that absence will teach him everything your presence tried to. The woman who knows her worth doesn't chase, she chooses.